I think so. I think we are going live. Welcome, Belvidere First, Belvidere people, Boone County people, Winnebago people, people who are just people who don't necessarily identify with the geographic region. It's good to have you here today. This is our Wednesday devotional. It used to be our Thursday devotional, but now it's Wednesday because I have both Curtis and Ashley here on Wednesday. I like these guys. They're conversational. Although for whatever reason, Curtis gets quieter on camera than he ever is in person. I don't know what happens there. Remember, Curtis, whatever you do, don't stare at the camera.
Now I'm staring at the camera.
I can't stop looking at it. It's watching
Staring.
me. By the way, I am sporting the world's best boss mug that someone got me for pastor appreciation. I actually went to a pastor's meeting this morning, took my world's best boss mug with me, and said, "Ha, take that, other second best bosses. This is the world's best." So if you have any other mug other than this, it is actually an imposter mug. You are not the best boss. It is me. So we are in a living free study on understanding depression. Today we're just going to do the introduction into it. I had both Curtis and Ashley go suffer from depression so that they could, more readily be able to talk
about this better.
Yeah, you know what? You got to feel it. You got to connect to it. I'm just making sure, by the way, that our audio is kicking. Our audio looks to be kicking. We look to be streaming on YouTube, but I do not see us streaming on the Facebooks. So just to verify that, as we're doing this, I will double check that we are on Facebook. While we're doing that, Curtis, you and Ashley both have very different experiences when it comes to dealing with depression in your respective families. Could you tell me, first Curtis and then Ashley, how things like that, like any sort of mental illness, any sort of struggle with things like depression or anything like that was kind of handled in your family growing up? One, we have a strict Christian background, and how would you describe your background? Functionally heathen?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Right. So that kind of helps us. That kind of helps us suss it out a little bit. So, in your strict Christian background, how would you say things like mental illnesses and things like that were handled, Curtis?
My family, I don't know. We kind of was just deal with it. That's kind of how it was,
I think the words you used were "suck it up."
Yeah, suck it
right?
up. Deal with it. I don't know. Our family, we didn't really talk about depression. Really didn't.
You saw it, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe too, one of the things in our generation, we're a little better at labeling things than we were then, right? Gosh, if someone was just in a bad place or in a bad mood or they were melancholy, there were different phrases and things like that used. We had different ways, I think, of dealing with it than we do now. Do you remember any specific instances or anything like that where people were struggling with things and it was kind of handled in the, just go suck it up kind of way?
I don't know if I just wasn't observant or...
There's no way your dad watches the stream, right?
No.
I'm kidding.
No, in all honesty, my dad's side of the family, we were never close to, and I think they deal with it more than my mom's side. My mom's side, they didn't deal with it as much, and if they did, they were better at hiding it.
Yeah, and I think that was a whole lot of our growing up. I'm doing all our Pepsi Max commercial there. So in your family, Ashley, kind of growing up, how did you see these kind of things, in particular depression, but we've also dealt with things like anger and stuff like that. We've been talking about how depression a lot of times is anger turned inward. So how maybe did you see it growing up?
Some people in my family were very accepting to mental illness, and they sought, medical professional help to get prescribed medications to help them overcome some of that stuff. And there were some people in my family who didn't understand it. They didn't feel that type of stuff, so they didn't really believe in it. And I think that speaks for a lot of people. Some people are willing to accept it and deal with it and maybe seek out some help or find a way to cope with it. And some people don't understand it, so they just kind of ignore it, and that's just kind of how they are.
Right. So, and I will say this, because I was born in 1972, many, many years before either of these two were born. I think I graduated high school before either of you were born, too. I graduated in 90.
I was born in 89.
Oh, look at that.
I was born in 88.
88, all right. So these guys were born while I was in high school. I don't remember hearing the word mental illness used outside of they're crazy, they're nuts, they're cuckoo, anything like that until 2000.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, I mean, I just grew up, and that was just not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Bipolar started to be a thing maybe, you know, after I was already out of high school. I mean, that kind of stuff. It was just they had a different way of dealing with it, or talking about it, or discussing it. And obviously a lot of unhealthy ways. I have to say there was a whole lot of, like Curtis would say, suck it up, or not recognizing that there's a problem. Or what's worse is you'd have somebody, if they had an anger thing, if they had a depression thing, if they had, you know, some sort of severe, what we call now like a clinical thing, they would actually just be that way, and you just had to learn to deal with them.
Yeah.
Right? So if you had somebody that was angry, you just walked on eggshells around them. If you had somebody that was depressed, you just lived with the fact that you didn't know from day to day. And sometimes you didn't realize that, you know, what they were going through was depression, because what it came out to you as, you know, they're mad at you for something and they're coming at you, right? And all of a sudden you're dealing the brunt of what's going on there. So there is a sense in which I think we've become better at dealing with mental illness in general. So we're going to kind of do the introduction to understanding depression from the Living Free group. And the reason we're doing the introduction again is because the last time I did the introduction, apparently I did 38 seconds of the introduction, and then it got cut off. So as far as I know, we are still streaming. I should probably double check before we get going. Now that we are at least 38 seconds into this, I know that we have had some internet connectivity issues in this church. But the only way for me to do that is if one of you two carry on the conversation while I do that.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you.
So far away, Curtis.
I know.
All right, looks good. All right, looks like we are still live. So what they say here, and this is kind of interesting, when it comes to depression, according to Living Free, most life-controlling problems are the sin that so easily entangles us, experienced by every believer, referring to the sin in Hebrews 12:1, right? That we all have things that kind of get onto us as we run the race. I've said often that when I was saved, God freed me from a whole lot of things, but there were some things I didn't even realize I needed to be free from, that I was still struggling with. It took me a while to get to that place where I understood what I needed to happen in me, right?
Right.
It says depression will actually work in reverse. And that a lot of times it can begin with a biological abnormality or genetic transmitted defect in which big words, biochemical predisposition is already present. So what they go into here is that milder forms of depression and things like that a lot of times have a genetic component. Now, here's what we know as Christians, that you can have things that have a physical, a spiritual, or an emotional seat of that problem. So you can have an anger problem that is a purely spiritual problem. That there's a part of your life that's not surrendered to God, and you're a terrible person to people because that thing's not surrendered to God. You can also have a biological problem. There are some people that I know. You're gonna have predispositions towards certain sins, right? I can tell you that I get hungrier. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Ashley's leading our eating disorders class on Wednesday nights. I get hungrier than my wife does. I'm sure I do, Curtis, because she will go long periods of eating and be like, "Man, I am really hungry." I go like an hour, and I hate the world, and God has forsaken me, and it is just time for me to jump off a cliff because life will never get any better than you put a sandwich in my mouth, and I'm like, no, I'm good.
Right.
I'm good. No,
Life has been renewed.
I know. There's
Lord
hope,
shine his face
hope
on you.
shines again, right? And so obviously I'm going to have a bigger struggle with that than she does in that area. Just like I think Kristen would be okay saying that she's going to struggle more with things like depression or falling into that than I do. Now, I have what I think almost every pastor has. I have the letdown after Sunday, right? Like Sunday, that's the smoke detector, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's going to drive me bonkers. I'm not even sure where that smoke detector is at. In that, hey, good morning, Ron Bowers. It's good to see you. And I will a lot of times, as a pastor, when you come off of your Sunday high, you go through a low. Kristen, every now and then I'll be doing something and I'll be like walking around the house grumpy on a Monday, grumpy. And she'll just look at me and go, I hate Mondays, right? And she's saying I hate Mondays in the context of, why are you being so grumpy, David, right? That's what she's saying. However, that's not the same as what somebody who goes through it long term, who actually struggles with it. And where that can be either, a family genetic type thing, mom struggled with it and then I struggle with it and then my kids are going to have to struggle with it.
Excuse me.
And understand too, that we're all dealt a deck of cards. I mean, there's some stuff. I gave the illustration Sunday about the pink donut, right, that has been haunting me. And I went to a place today, and I don't know who the marketing genius is that did this, but that person is a genius that wrote on the top of the donut box, "You deserve a donut." I can't argue with that. I do deserve a donut. I should be allowed to have that donut. Man, I put in a lot of work. Right?
Get behind me, Satan.
No. I used to joke, when I lived in Kentucky, we lived about 3.5 miles from a Krispy Kreme. And my thought process was, I bike up to the Krispy Kreme, have the donut, and bike back. And now I have earned that donut by biking up there 7 miles round trip, so I could have that donut. Turns out with biking, you actually need a lot more miles than that to get a Krispy Kreme. A Krispy Kreme is a lot.
Yeah, so
a Krispy
good.
Kreme donut is a lot of biking. It is not 7 miles. Oh, Krispy Kreme off the line though, right?
Cream-filled ones. Come on.
No.
man. The chocolate
No,
on
you get the
top.
plain ones when they come right out of the oven there.
Oh, yeah.
Because they will literally take their little sticky thing, like while you're waiting there, and take that right off the line and hand that to you on a napkin. And it is like so warm it melts in your mouth.
It's like
It
sugary
is,
air.
oh my gosh, it is like the best thing that God has ever created. Outside you, Kristen, of course. You and Krispy Kreme. But it says, here's the thing. It says that these types of depressions, the long-term types of depressions, the one where people are not just, it's not just a, I struggle with it from time to time, but it's almost like a default state of being, right? It's like almost like when the world gets quiet, if something doesn't interfere, they can fall back into that place. And the thing is they are so painful, they a lot of times will lead to coping mechanisms which become the life-controlling problems. So a lot of times we talk about the life-controlling problems setting the rest of our life into disorder. In this case, there's a disorder in the life that begins to make us deal with it in some very unhealthy ways. So, I didn't ask you this before. When I say somebody without saying any names or giving any hints, do you know people that suffer from depression that go through it, right?
Yes.
Have you ever noticed some unhealthy ways that people will deal with that?
Yes.
Like, can you give an example?
I've known people that have been depressed and they don't leave their house for days on end.
Right. Oh yeah, shut the doors, shut the windows.
And they don't do anything at the house either, right?
Yeah. I joke with this. So, are you ready for this? I live in the basement of my own house. I know. But the reason is Kristen loves the basement because down there we kind of have like our own living room spread with our own bedroom spread with our own bathroom, and the boys can stink up the whole place upstairs and we don't care, right? Now, that being said, we keep it clean. I'm not, gosh, Kristen hates it when I talk about the house and you're already off on that. Anyway, that being said, it's funny because I'm the person who always wants like all the windows open and all the light coming in, and Kristen loves her a nice snuggly cave. Right, she loves to shut all the windows and the doors and have a nice blanket over, and like that's her. And we're very different in that. And as it happens, guess which one of us is more likely to struggle with getting in that place? So have you in your life, have you known people that struggle with it?
Yeah, I have.
And what are some like unhealthy ways that they have dealt with that?
Eating, drinking, drugs, and gambling.
A lot of alcoholism is a form of self-medicated depression,
Yeah.
right? Like they're falling into it, they don't know what to do with it, and the easiest way out of it is, get enough alcohol in you that you forget that you're mad about it, right?
Yeah.
Which is ironic, since alcohol is a depressant,
Yeah, it is.
right? So here it says the biological basis of most ongoing depression. Most people that suffer from real chronic all the time depression actually have a biological component on some level, right? And I think too, and I struggle with this as a pastor, right? Like I was talking to the Lord about this week. We had such an amazing service Sunday. We had to shut off the cameras to get to the amazing part of the service. We were talking about in the meeting this morning how we had some satanic attack at our church. We turned off the cameras. We have a prayer meeting down here, and we have a powerful prayer meeting. And we had people who were literally active addicts who were coming free of that addiction at our altar on Sunday. We were having that kind of thing. And here's the thing, I am never going to dismiss the absolute power of God to physically or emotionally heal somebody. I will say this, that if you are not aware of it, if you are not willing to confess it, to admit it, to say that I'm struggling with it, I don't generally see God healing that, right? Like if it's something you're holding on to, I've seen some people get in that place, right? And they are not going to ask God to do anything about it. They're kind of like, no, God, I'll deal with this on my own, right? Yeah, sure, I get angry and yell at people, or I get, in this really bad place where I do, but I'm just going to deal with that on my own. You don't need, it's fine, God, I don't need any help, right? Which is supposed to be a guy thing, Curtis, right?
Right.
We're the ones that are like, no, I don't need any help.
I don't
I'm
need
cool.
help. I got
No,
this.
I'm
It's a
good.
human thing.
Right. But it's a very human thing, right? Because there are some things too that people just don't want someone else's help with. Why is that? Why are you supposed to like that in those areas or in any area?
Sometimes trust issues, they
You opened up
experience-
to somebody before.
and they disappointed you, or they let you down, or they didn't handle things the way they were supposed to, and now you have trust issues with people.
How bad do you want me to tell him myself? If my brother has trust issues, I'm the reason. So he watches me on Facebook sometime. Okay, this is it. I'm gonna say I was 13, which would have made him 10, right?
Yeah.
And he started keeping a diary. And I found that, or he let me read
Oh,
that diary.
no.
Oh, I know. There's no way the story goes good
I
when
hope
you
you
give.
repented.
Oh, so many times. I didn't even realize how much he was holding. I mean, I think I was out of the Navy, so I was probably in my mid-20s, late or early
You were
30s.
older too.
Before he actually let me know that it really bothered him as much as it did.
Oh.
Because I took his diary and read it out to the family and laughed at the parts I thought was especially funny. When I say that I am the cause of his trust issues, I was a different person then. I wasn't fully developed. And so right here he is opening up. Look, I hear some of my deep intimate feelings and I'm like, oh, let's go talk about these with the whole family. And right, yeah. So that wasn't...
That was not the business.
Right. But sometimes we have problems asking for help because we run into people who do the adult version of that, which is gossip.
Yeah, or judgment, too.
Or judgment. Or changing the way they treat you. You open up about something and all of a sudden, well, I'm not going to treat you like this anymore because you're that kind of person.
Yep.
Right.
Don't understand what your struggle is, so gotta withdraw myself from you.
Right. You know what? In dealing with people that have addiction, one of the things that I always want to reinforce is that I don't see you as an addict. Right? I understand somebody dealing with drugs, alcohol, things like that in a way that they are going to, even when they are delivered from it, even when they come free from it, there's a chance that they're going to relapse here and there until it completely takes, right? I used to joke that in Alcoholics Anonymous, they said it was a 12-step program, but the first 3 steps were 1, 2, 3, drunk, 1, 2, 3, drunk, 1, 2, because they would get 3 steps in, relapse, have to start back over, and a lot of times they did that a couple times before it took. And what I always want them to know is, I know that you're a person beyond that, right? That you are not defined by your mistakes any more than any of us are defined by the things we do. Just because my sins happen to be respectable and nice and people are, oh, pride, that's your sin? Oh, listen, pride's like the worst, right? Pride is the death of love. Pride as a sin is literally what disconnects people from one another because they say, I will stand on the offense rather than forgive you because of my pride, and yet we want to think that that's a worse sin than someone who struggles with alcohol. Alcoholism is easy to see. You're like, hey, there you are struggling with your alcoholism, you big sinner, versus the person who's prideful and just judges and condemns and hurts people, drives them out of the church, leaves them forever away from the Lord because of their pride, right?
The one thing that came to my mind when you said I don't see people as addicts is sometimes people don't see themselves as addicts.
Well, then that's a different problem, isn't it? If they don't see themselves as addicts, like, right, then that goes back to how is God going to deliver you from something that you won't lay at the altar, right? God doesn't usually drag it out of your hands and go put it up on the altar for you and sacrifice that thing. He sets out the altar.
I wish he would.
Right? Come on, Lord. What are you making
You're
me do
not
all
a
the work?
genie.
Right. No, but that is the requirement, right?
Right.
The requirement is that we take that thing and we lay it on the altar. I have had things in my life that I didn't know if they were good or bad, but I knew they were taking up a lot of my time, right? They were eating away a lot at who I was, and because of that, I put it on the altar. I'm like, all right, Lord, I'm going to put this on the altar. If this is something that I don't need, I am willing for you to take that away from me. I'm willing to put that back in your hands. The only time he ever told me not to do that, are you ready for this? Is when I asked him about the ministry. Because there was a point in my life, man, there were some struggles that I dropped out of Bible college and had to go back in and finish, like later, but in that interim period, right, where I just felt like a failure at life. And I said, okay, Lord, I'm going to put ministry on the altar, and if you want to take that away from me, I'm okay. And I just had a strong conviction. He's like, don't you ever put that on the altar, right? Like that is not a thing I sacrifice, right? That is, right? So, all right. Due to relatively high frequencies of these types of illness, of depression, things like that, obviously there are times in which you need to get physicians and professional counselors involved. I always say this. I definitely believe in professional counselors. I believe in medication for certain types of illness. I believe in long-term medications for certain types of illness, even mental disorders and things like that. Because sometimes there is just a place in our brain that is malformed, or we got something going on, and we absolutely need that. The discernment portion comes in as figuring it out. Is it a physical? Is it a spiritual? Is it an emotional issue, right? We were talking beforehand. I actually worked with a clinician once. I was doing some different work for her, and I said, hey, I'm in ministry, and so when you have these, this was in the poor side of town, and had a lot of throughput of a lot of clients coming in, making schedules for appointment, right? And it was set up as a a mental health clinic. And my question for that lady, that doctor, was, hey, what are some of the things you use to help people in addiction and stuff like that? What are some of the things when they're struggling that you do? And she's like, oh, we don't counsel anybody. We just prescribe the medicine they need. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the far. And again, I think Christians can get too far on that side. Just like we can get too far on the just walk it off, just shake it off. Nothing's really wrong with you. If you just turned over to Jesus, you wouldn't be in such a bad place. Versus some people who are, give me a pill for this. I'm not going to deal with the root issue. I'm not going to deal with what's going on in my life. I just want some medicine to take care of this. I think you have both those extremes, right? Mm-hmm. Is that?
Yeah.
Jesus and counseling is an okay thing. I think it needs to be more talked about. You can have both.
You can. And man, we need more good Christian counselors in the world. Kids, if you're looking for an occupation, Christian counselor is something so desperately needed. Christian psychologists, Christian counselors are so needed. Listen, I'm always looking for good ones, because I'm like, if I got somebody I know, because even as a pastor, even if I think, if I spent enough time with this person and prayed and blah, 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 what I realize? I don't always have the kind of time to invest in their life to get them past some major life-changing illnesses, right? Yeah. And so having a counselor who's dedicated to that, right, where they're setting up the appointments and keeping that, as a pastor, you want that, right? Takes it off your plate. So the question is, here's the question, Curtis, dun, 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 dun. Nature versus nurture. When we say nature versus nurture, do you know what that means?
Nature is more like, would that be more like taking care of it? And then nature versus nurture. Nurture would be kind of saying it's okay and not it's not letting the person change. Close. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Nature versus nurture.
Nature versus nurture, I think is.
I'm gonna bail you both out. Well, you can give me your I think is if you want.
No, you go ahead.
So when they talk about nature versus nurture in psychology, they're talking about this. They're talking about, is what you struggle with something you were born struggling with that you'll always struggle with, or is it nurture, meaning is it something caused by your environment? So in being raised, do you act this way because that's how you were raised and there were certain things? I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about somebody and some of the choices they make and stuff like that. And the conversation was, yeah, but they had this and this and this happened to them in their childhood, and there's stuff they're not dealing with from their childhood and stuff like that. And my thought in this particular case was, it's not all that, right? I like your haircut. Thanks, Amanda. Got them all cut. It's a dad joke. I'm a dad. I do that. There are some things we struggle with because of how we were brought up. Certain things that we saw our parents do, and we do it like that because that's how we saw our parents do it, right?
Right.
Man, church is always a big hodgepodge of that. You always find people that think church should be one way or the other because this is how my church did it here, this is how this church did it there, and they've always got all these mixed up. Well, that's the way church is supposed to be because that's how I went to church. Mm-hmm. Pastor Bashir, who's out getting his eye fixed today, would say preference over power, right? They choose their preference for how church should be over the power of God moving in that place, right? Nature is the what do I deal with because of who I am. I would say guys struggle with certain things because guys are who they're guys, right? I think there are some struggle that are endemic to, being male or female, right? There are things that the women struggle with that guys don't understand, and things guys struggle with that I don't think women quite understand. Not that they don't go through the same things, but they don't understand them in the same way because of how they look at the world based on that. We could get into gender as a social construct. We won't go there other than to say the science is overwhelmingly supportive of the idea that men and women are biologically different on a cellular level, not just on, not just the big parts, but all the parts are different. You guys are crazy. We know this now scientifically. I kid. If they're crazy, then we're emotionally detached. So, right, if we're going to take the extremes, right, then we're not really in touch with our feelings. And if we were, we'd be a little crazier.
I
right?
heard a thing where someone said that men are kind of like waffles with all those little squares, and that women are like spaghetti. It's all mixed together.
Waffles and spaghetti. Ugh. I don't like putting those two together.
I'm sure if it was plain without syrup, it'd be okay. Maybe you could put some garlic butter on there.
Right. And so, yeah, thanks.
We should try it sometime. Have a spaghetti and waffle night at church.
Waffle spaghetti.
So getting back somewhere near the track is this. So when it comes to depression, is it a nature or nurture thing? Is it something that you're born with that you're always going to struggle with? Is it something that you learned in your environment by things that happened to you?
I think it could be from both.
It could be from both, right? And this is where we talk about having both a physical, an emotional, and then of course in ours there's going to be a third dimension, and that is spiritual. That there is a spiritual component. I can tell you there is a type of depression that because of how you were born, you are always going to struggle with, just because of your genetics and your biology and things like that. I can tell you there is a depression that will sometimes hit you because it's how you learn to cope with things. You've learned to go into the shell, or you've learned to ball up like an armadillo because of the way you were attacked and criticized. People that had one highly critical parent, I notice are going to struggle with that a lot because all of a sudden the internal dialogue in their head is very critical, and so now you have a nurture thing where they were raised thinking that. And then I definitely believe there is a spiritual attack of depression, right? Elijah the prophet running from Jezebel is one of the most vivid biblical accounts of what a spiritual attack of depression looks like, right? Mm-hmm. Our society has come to value, the Apostle Paul writes in Thessalonians, "May the God who gives us peace make you holy in every way and keep your whole being, spirit, soul, and body free from every fault at the coming of our Lord Jesus." You know what I love, and I think we get messed up too, and this is another reason why we struggle dealing with confessing things. When we talk about faults and perfection in Scripture, right? When it says keep you free from every fault, does that mean you may never make a mistake?
No.
Right? So what does that mean then?
I think if you make a mistake, you find a way to fix it, not just with God, repentance, but also making it right with that person or those people that may have been offended or hurt by you, and vice versa.
But when this verse says, "May the God who gives us peace make you holy in every way and keep your whole being, spirit, soul, and body free from every fault at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ," what do you think fault means there? Curtis. Take it away, Curtis Kettner.
I didn't have time to think about that.
All right, I'll come back. Because here's one of the things, too. When we read the Bible a lot of times, too, we don't realize that we are putting into that word a whole lot of meaning that word may or may not have.
Yeah.
Right? So I can tell you that 25-year-old me reading this scripture when it says, "Keep you from every fault," means not making a mistake. That every time I sin, I have violated this verse. I have broken God's heart. I have fallen away. Right? I'm gonna have to find a way for Him to accept me again. Right? Like there was a very legalistic, very desperately seeing my own wickedness and never the grace and mercy of God. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's the way you take that verse, you're in a bad place. Right?
Right.
So, but then if we take it to, keep you from every fault, where it says He makes you holy and keeps you from every fault, well, then He kind of does it, and even when you mess up, it's fine, it's okay, because, that's just who you are, and God understands, and don't worry about it. That's also a bad attitude, because then what do? You leave all the bad stuff in there, you never work on it, you never get to that place where you're being sanctified. So I believe fault here, when He says keep you from every fault, right, that He's talking about you can have a baby who's perfect because they have all their fingers and they have all their toes. Now, they can't do algebra and they can't do complex math, and they probably can't bake you a truffle like Alex can bake, right? Or make, or however Alex makes those shiny little truffles he makes, right? Like the baby can't do that, right? But we still say that baby is perfect, that it's without fault, because it is what it's supposed to be, right? And then if there were something wrong, if there were fingers missing or an arm missing or things like that, not that we don't love them anymore, but we see that as it is missing a thing, right? A thing that should be there, that would be an idea of a fault. But spiritually, we could not be whole, right? Because there are things missing spiritually that we should have, but that we don't have those there. And so God is trying to give us those things, build those things in us, right? I've often said that if we are the body of Christ If I tell my hand to pick up this pen and my hand cannot respond, right? My hand just lays there, right? And I've been old enough where I've told my body to do things it did not respond to. I'm like, pick up that box, and my body's like, nope, we're done. Day's over, man. We've had some pantry days, man.
Unless you see me pick up too, then you're
yeah,
like,
and I'm
right.
like, then the anger builds up, and I gotta beat him at that, right? That's our productive anger, right? That if we are the body of Christ and Christ tells his body to move and his body doesn't move, that makes the body of Christ crippled, right? And there's the idea that the body of Christ in America doesn't necessarily always respond to the moving or the will of Christ, right? And so that's a fault, right? It's not able to do the thing that it's supposed to do. Secular mental health professionals will almost always ignore the spiritual dimension of human life in their intervention. That's one of the things why we need great Christian counselors, right? Because I don't believe you can just go in it from the psychological, emotional side of it and come away with a 100% complete answer. That's why I say there's a lot of things that are great at diagnosing and helping us get there. But I think true healing only comes when Christ is involved, right? In fact, spiritual aspect may be the most significant determinant of the ultimate outcome in regards to coping with severe depression. Now, coping is a big part of what we're going to talk about here. We're not necessarily talking about curing it in this type of support group, right? You both had lunch, and you're both...
Yeah, I know. I'm like
I'm
fighting.
listening.
I know. But you yawned, then you yawned. And I'm like, yeah, we just had carbs. We had Burger King. She had some fancy things she made for herself because she's,
Fancy.
It looked fancy. It looked fancier than my Burger King chicken sandwich. Tell you that.
Chicken and rice, man.
Anywho.
It looked fancy.
Yeah, our society has come to value something generally called therapy, meaning psychotherapy is usually associated with special academic qualifications. This is what it's going to get into here, and it's going to say this, that sometimes we think that we can fix something by going deep enough into someone's childhood or into their background or into what happened to them that we're going to figure out why they do everything they do. Right? That would actually be a 100% nurture way of looking at things. That means, okay, everything you do, any mistakes you make, any flaws you have, all of those things come from the fact that you were raised a certain way and you do things a certain way. But we know that's not true. The other side of that, though, the nature side would be, I am born this way and I can never change and I can never do anything different because it's how I was born, therefore I'll always be like that. And we also know that that's not true. Mm-hmm. We know that that's not true because I was born a lot of the ways that I am not now, and most of that comes through Christ changing me, right? There are some things that I think just over the course of time you change, but there are some things that I was born to be that I am not because Christ has changed me into a new creature, right?
Praise the Lord.
Woo! So here's the thing. The power of faith in Christ Jesus will, however, manifest itself in the work in this group. I know I'm kind of skimming through this because we're just kind of introducing ourselves to it. And what we're going to try to do in the next few weeks when we're talking about depression is we're trying to help those of you that struggle with it struggle better.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's a fair way to put it.
I think so too, right? I wish, and I told somebody this, I wish God would take the desire to sin out of me. Right?
I would agree.
I would say that most of the time when I'm helping someone who's addicted, right, that what they always say is, I wish God would take the desire for the thing out of me, right?
Right.
And I have never yet seen that prayer answered. Right? That when it comes to a desire issue, when your desire is for sin and you're giving into that desire, that God's plan for your life is not to take away the temptation, but God's plan for your life is to teach you to overcome. Right? That God's plan for your life is to teach you to get stronger than the thing. I always say that the things that bothered me at 3 years old don't bother me now. Right? Things that bothered me at 13 don't bother me now. Things that bothered me at 23 don't bother me now. Things that bothered me at 48, I've let some of those go. Right? Now that I'm 49,
some.
I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying there aren't still things
Getting
there.
somewhere.
But yeah.
Things that bothered me at 23 sometimes still bother me.
Right? Well, there's still work to be done, right? You have not ascended unto heaven yet. You have not transcended your mortal coil, taken on your wings, and flown off to heaven. Because I still need you to do youth pastor work, and that would really inconvenience me. So I'm kind of glad we're still there, right? But what we want to do when we talk about depression, one of the things I was talking about the other day with somebody is that and we were talking about this earlier, if you don't identify the problem, if you don't get a handle on it, right, if you're not laying it at the altar, if I'm doing something and nobody ever says, hey, by the way, you're doing this, right? Like I've seen people with depression just suck the energy out of a room, right? Like they're in a place where they're going to openly manifest their depression, and they're going to do it in such a way that nobody around them can be happy, right? Just all the energy out of the room goes straight to that person's dark abyss of a soul, right? Yeah. And the thing is that same person the next day could be in a place. I hate doing that. That's my son, but he should know I'm on the air right now. Although he could literally be stuck in the ceiling. He's fixing a ceiling fan.
We'll rescue you in 30 minutes.
We'll rescue you in 30 minutes. So what we want to do is we want to help you to identify the things that you're going through so that you can cope with it better, so you can put them on the altar better, so you can seek help where the help is necessary better. And if there's a medical solution that you can find, we actually want to help you get to do that so that whatever you're going through in life, you're going to do it better, right? So here are the signs. Now here's what I say. I will list a sign here, a sign that you may be struggling with depression or that you have a predisposition for it, and you guys tell me what you know as far as what you've seen in your life. It says a family history, number one, a family history of depression or alcoholism. Many counselors are skeptical of the genetic blah, 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 but it says, for example, one study indicates daughters of alcoholic fathers have a significantly higher likelihood of experiencing depression than daughters of non-alcoholic fathers, while the sons will have a significantly higher incidence of alcoholism. I thought that was very interesting. So if you're a daughter of an alcoholic father, you have a significantly higher likelihood of experiencing depression. Whereas if you're the son of an alcoholic father, you tend to be an alcoholic.
Right.
I was thinking about that. So one, there's a difference, again, between male and female, because like I said, that all the studies they do come back. Robert Kirch, this is why you need groups like AA. Absolutely celebrate recovery. Age 3 helps us heal and be open. Absolutely, Robert Kirch actually runs a recovery group. He's a Christian counselor and a good friend of mine. Good input there, Robert. When it comes to daughters tending to go through depression, here's my thought, and correct me if I'm wrong. Robert, correct me if I'm wrong. I tend to feel like a daughter watching her dad go through that and wanting to help and not being able to help would begin to internalize his struggle and take some of that on herself, right? And again, turn that thing inward until it becomes depression.
Yeah.
Is that?
I think a son or a daughter could feel and experience that.
Yeah, it says, well, and either one can, right? And these are percentages, right? Right.
Yeah.
That daughters are going to tend to go this way, and that sons will go this way.
Yeah.
I talked about this too. They do this with toddlers, where if you take a toddler and you separate them from their mom, they have this experiment where they put them in a room and they're playing, and then all of a sudden the light comes on, and they can see through the one-way mirror, and mom is sitting over there. Mm-hmm. And if it's a boy and a girl, statistically, they're going to do one of two things, right? The girl is going to see mom, and she's going to sit down, and she's going to cry and wait for mom to come get her. Even mom doesn't get her, she ups to crying, but she sits there, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the boy, most of the time, is going to go beat on the glass. Yeah. He's going to go try and attack that thing and break down that barrier, right? Mm-hmm. That they both have the same experience, but they respond to it differently based on their sex. So
next one, number 2, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask if you wanted to say anything. I was trying to think about your, but we'll. All right. Dun, 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 dun. I know these things, usually when we do them on Wednesday nights, there's no cameras on us. We can talk about whatever we want. My mom and dad watch this a lot, right? I don't know that my sister and my brother do because, they're nerds who don't love their brother. But, my parents do because they have to love me contractually. We have paperwork, right? But you can't have, so if you have a family history of depression or alcoholism, because again, like we're saying, a lot of times alcoholism is a self-medicated form of depression, right? You're self-medicating yourself for that. If your family has a history of it, you're likely to have that. In the same way that I am likely to struggle with diabetes if I have a family history of it, which I do, which is why I can't have the donut. 2, a long-standing cyclical problem. Clinical depression can be traced back into childhood. People often report they always knew something was different. Some severe depressions run in cycles, some going for months, between deep valleys, cycling rapidly, perhaps around the monthly menstrual cycles. I think I skipped that one when I was talking by myself. I'm like, yes, I'm 49 years old, and yes, I don't like saying that still. That's okay. We had a person that worked our food pantry, and he was in his 90s, and he was raised in a different age. and he manned the table that had like the shampoos and stuff like that. And he would give those out, and every now and then there would be feminine hygiene products, and he would give those out at the pantry. And he had no idea how any of them worked, being a 90-year-old man. Like it was just never talked about his whole life, so he had no idea what a feminine napkin was or why anyone would ever need one. And it was funny. It was, I'm gonna say we talked about it. All right. 3, interpersonal relationships are difficult. Emotions are likely to be flattened despite the likelihood of having bouts of weeping. The person doubts he or she knows what love is. Man, this is one of the things. You might be suffering from depression if you have a hard time or even believing that you know what love is because of the flattening of your emotion. The difficulty in forming and or maintaining intimate relationship extends also to God because he seems distant and unavailable to the person with depression. Even if you're suffering depression short term, even if it's not the clinical kind, you can go through types of depressions that will cause you to emotionally flatline, and that will actually make it harder for you to hear from God because you're having a hard time feeling anything, right? Robert says the thing is that children grew up with the environment and they think that is normal, right? Like this is how people act. This is what they do. Yep. We're talking about in our church, man. We love our church so much, but we reach some people, and in our children's ministry, we have kids coming in with just problems you don't think kids would be dealing with, and yet they are knee deep in some very, very grown up problems. Have you ever been through times of emotional, like where it wasn't, what I'm saying? I definitely have. I've done it in ministry, right, where you just get so hit by so much stuff, and you're processing the grief or the loss or all of those, and all of a sudden you realize, I don't feel it, right? Like I'm singing, I don't feel it. I'm praying, I don't feel it. I'm here, I don't feel it. And all of a sudden I realize there's something wrong with my emotions. I'm actually struggling with something here. What's going on, right? And a lot of that has to do with unprocessed, right? Haven't sat down and talked to anybody. There's stuff going on and you're not dealing with it, and it's not just getting better. Right? You could break a bone and the bone will heal. It's going to heal regardless. The question is it going to heal right or is it going to heal wrong? And if it heals really wrong, it'll cause an infection and kill you. Right. I didn't even realize. One of the great things that caused people to stop dying in war, they found this little brace thing that when you broke your femur, like if you broke that bone in war, if a bullet hit that, there was like a 90% chance you were going to die. Right, from being hit in the leg because it broke that femur, and because that bone would stay right, and that infection would set in and you would die. And so a guy invented a stretcher of the leg that allowed them to pull the leg out to separate the bone, to set it correctly, and doing that was all of a sudden 95% that it was not going to be a fatal wound.
That's awesome. Right,
because the wound untreated, left like it was, no one ever taking the time to set it right, becomes a lot worse than the original wound was. Yeah. Right? It's up to us to break the chains and cycles of our struggles. Amen. Yeah. Irritability and anger.
Ashley probably thinks I got that right.
Yeah, she's like, he is depressed. One of the factors involved in preventing a formation of intimate relationships is a problem of irritability. Loved ones, coworkers, and even neighbors are likely to notice this. They report as having to walk on eggshells around the depressed person. It says they have a radar antenna which constantly scanning to lock on to the person to the cause of irritability. Psychologically, the person with depression has difficulty tolerating the thought that he or she is just simply irritable, and there's little to no external cause. So here's what they're talking about here. This is one. Have you ever had that experience of somebody that you felt like you had to walk on eggshells around, or they were going to snap at you? Do you want to elaborate? Are you going to nod, or are you going to tell me?
I mean, if this is pretty self-explanatory. You just feel like nothing you can say or do feels right, and that whatever you say or do in front of that person, they're going to have something to say about it no matter what. And I think that's really important to just remember that it's kind of them dealing with something and not to take it personally.
Right, and if you're trying to help somebody that's suffering with this, understand that irritability comes from them. They're in an internal struggle. They're having an internal pain, and they're like, this has got to be somebody's fault. How many of you, okay, listen. My wife rearranges the house a lot, and my wife has a lot of different things in the house, and every now and then she moves them, and when she moves them, guess who's the person that's going to find that?
In the dark?
It's going to be me. I am a bull in a china shop. I'm walking through a narrow space, and she has put something there, and I will shoulder block that thing, right? Knock it right off, not even meaning to. I will put my knee, my shin straight into that. And I never think to myself, David, you idiot, you ran right into that thing. Why weren't you paying attention? Do you know what I think?
Why'd you put that there?
Why did you put that there, Kristen? Why did you put that thing there? She did like she's sitting around going, ha ha ha, he's gonna trip over this. This would be hilarious. Like that's like in your mind, right? But that's what's going on, right? And so somebody with this depression, this thing internal, they're like, this has got to be somebody's fault, right?
Yeah.
It can't just be that it hurts inside, right?
Yeah.
Robert says this is why a grounded church is so important, because the secular world is so wrapped up in how the client is going to pay. Amen. You know the difference between counselors and me, Robert, is I'll do it for free. I'll do it just because I love you. That being said, they can go in a lot, like we said earlier, they can go in a lot deeper, spend more time. All right, 5, sleep disorder. Insomnia is common, waking up after only 2 or 3 hours of sleep and unable to be falling asleep again. For some reason, the reverse is true too. Sometimes it'll be too much sleep. It occurs after a time of difficulty in first falling asleep and being unable to get up in the morning. For some working people, there's sleeplessness during the week, followed by weekend, consisting of sleeping about 50% of the time, right? Have you ever seen, ever struggled, ever known? I can tell you this. There have been times when I'm under a lot of stress at church. I'm under a lot of stress at the pastorate. And Debbie knows this, because Debbie knows because like on some days I'll check out at noon because I've been here since 3:30 in the morning, right? Or I'll be, even 3 in the morning because I'm just going through some stuff. And, if I'm over the house and I'm going through, I'm like, you know what? I might as well be at the church working.
Mm-hmm.
I might as well go to the office and get something done. That way when the energy finally does leave me right around 12 or 1 o'clock, I can have a nice little collapse into a cry where it won't bother anybody.
Mm.
All right, here's the other one. We kind of talked about this before. Number 6, a desperate search of the cause, in search for a cause of their depression. Again, and this is one of the things that we have to be careful of, that depression is not always something that needs a cause.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't need to have, you don't necessarily need to have a bad event or something happen. Right? The triggers for it can be something super subtle that you don't even realize, right? Sometimes it can be where your thought life just takes off on a tangent, right?
Yeah.
They get into source amnesia. I'm not going to go into that because, I'm okay saying I'm not qualified to really get into that too much. Yeah. But source amnesia happens a lot of times. When we try to do the thing where we try to walk back and make everything a cause from your childhood and stuff like that, that sometimes we begin to create memories and events and things like that happened that actually didn't happen, but because we're looking for a cause, we make that thing the cause. I've known some people in my life that we went through the same situation together, and they came out saying this, and I was like, that's not what happened, right? But in their mind, that's absolutely what happened. That's and this was the motive of the person that did it. When they start saying that, when they start they know the motive of everybody in the room, something's wrong there, because there's no way they knew the motive of everybody in the room. There's no way
Nobody
they knew what
can.
everybody was thinking. Right. 7, a sense of going crazy, also called parenthood. Yeah. Nothing. I thought I would got you that one. Don't fake laugh.
No,
for
that
me
was a
now.
delay. That was a delay.
Yeah,
A sense
okay.
of going crazy.
Right.
So called parenthood. I was like, wait, where does it say that on there?
And you were looking on there. You were looking for that on your thing.
I was like, it was a joke.
And it was a joke. Thank you.
Because it's on there.
Thank
I know.
you.
I'm like, I see mothers with young children.
Right. Better to let God and focus on their strengths versus the weaknesses. Amen, Robert. Build up, right? 7, a sense of going crazy during the valley of depressive cycle. A person is likely to feel right on the edge of losing it. For mothers with young children, there's sometimes a fear of going over the edge and becoming dangerous to the children. Man, I don't think postpartum depression gets talked enough in general. Like, if I know somebody who has had a baby and that baby is under a year old, they could be in some stage of that, and that thing is a killer, right? I mean, that thing will make you feel like you're going crazy. That thing will knock you off your feet, right? I don't think you should make any major decisions in the last trimester of your pregnancy or for a year after that. Like, just put off any major stuff, because man, a lot of things that aren't big will feel really big. Postpartum depression it takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of support. A lot of times the person who loves you doesn't realize what you're going through, and they're like, why is this person mad at me or depressed? And now they're making themselves the source of it and all of that, and create all kinds of conflict that is not necessary. It says this seldom ever happens with them actually being dangerous to them, but the fear of losing control is very stressful. In fact, right down here, it says sometimes a person with depression is disappointed to learn their depression is not a mental illness in this sense. This disappointment may be understood due to the person's desire to gain relief from the pain of depression by simply going crazy and not having to continue to experience the enormous daily energy drain and enormous pain of coping with depression. They'd rather burn the house down than deal with going back and sitting in that pain of depression. Rather than go back there, they will start a fight. They will, just set everything on fire and get everybody running, right?
Yeah.
When we had Bridget, the hospitals would take Bridget, and they would keep her and let mom sleep and do all that and let me sleep. And so, but that was our first kid. So we're like, no, we want it in the room, right?
Yeah, you're so dumb.
Right? Exactly. So then when we got Lucas, I got excited because now Grandpa and Grandma have Bridget, and we have 2 days of sleep, before the calm, before the storm. Well, no, apparently since Bridget and Lucas, the hospitals now have this skin time or whatever they call it. And so now they want the baby stay in the room all night. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? I was like, take it, right? And they're like, no, we can't, But yet so we ended up doing that, and without the child care in there, we still got a bigger bill than we did with Bridget. So I'm just confused. I'm just kidding. Anyways, that kind of went along with postpartum depression. But anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. That was somewhat related to what we were talking about. That was marginally in the neighborhood of, I get it. So
no sleep causes depression. No.
Listen,
I gained weight with all 3 of our pregnancies.
Financial hardships also cause depression, so you were right.
Yes,
absolutely. Look at you backing him up. Number 8, a deep sense of worthlessness, the most hurtful symptom of the abiding sense of worthlessness. This is deeply rooted and does no good for the caring. I love this. It often does no good at all caring for family members or other Christians to offer words of encouragement. When all the good things about a depressed person are pointed out, the person will hear it as either false praise or else the words of someone who does not really know them. So listen to this. Someone going through depression, and you're trying to tell them, hey, you're not a bad person, you're not a terrible person, the Lord loves you, people love you, and all this. All they're hearing is, this person doesn't really know me. If they really knew me, that's not what they would think. Or they think, you're just flattering. This person's just trying to flatter me. They're just trying to say nice things about me. That's not really true because they don't realize that. It says right here, here's the point at which a deep spiritual warfare takes place because the devil, the accuser of the saints, usually plays this tape in their mind with words such as, you really are a loser. You might fool some of the people into thinking you're worthwhile, but you will never fool God. He knows you are nothing but junk and you know that you are junk. Why don't you save everyone a lot of trouble and kill yourself? And dude, and it comes down to that, right? It comes down to feeling like I am not, nobody really knows me. If they really knew me, they'd know what a loser I am, how terrible I am, how worthless I am, all of those things. Those are things the enemy loves to play on, loves to replay, and that's where that spiritual aspect really comes in, because I always say the devil, when he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, if you watch the lions go after the herd, they always wait till one zebra zigs instead of zags. Right? All the animals go this way, but one animal goes that way. And that animal that goes the wrong way outside the herd, that's the one they go after. And Satan is trying to separate you from anybody who loves you or could help you or might lift you up. And they're going to tell you, you're worthless and nobody really likes you. And all those people are being fake. And they'll say that church is full of fakes, even though they never talked to anybody in that church. But they'll say it because the enemy's back there in their head. I try to watch for it in services. Sometimes people will be off by themselves and the enemy's just in that person's head in the middle of a church service saying, hey, these people don't really like you. Nobody really loves you. Everybody thinks you're junk. And they'll believe it themselves and sink further down into it. 9, various physical disorders, right? There are a lot of painful physical disorders that can go along with depression. Headaches, backaches, gastronomical disorders. We're not sure why it accompanies depression. We are learning more and more. There's a huge connection between our emotions, our physical being, our spiritual being. 10, eating disorders. Depressed persons find themselves eating too much or too little, right? And then if you have weight loss or gain can further stress the person's devalued self-image. I was thinking about those people that are heavily into bulimia and they're literally skin and bones, and they say they look in the mirror and all they see is an enormous person, and you're just like,
how? Yeah.
Right. right?
Oh.
But somehow in their mind, that's how it works out, right? Energy loss in the valleys, right? They just absolutely die to it. I actually do a lot of marriage counseling where this one comes in when people are suffering depression and they don't realize their spouse is this last one down here. It says a common problem is a loss of sexual energy resulting in a reduced receptivity to sex. A mate is likely to experience this as rejection, respond with hostility, further increasing the isolation of the depressed person. So one person is depressed, they're losing their energy, they're losing their desire. The other person says, wow, this person is rejecting me and doesn't love me because they don't have the desire and they don't realize it's a depression. And all of a sudden it furthers that gap between the two of them because one feels rejected and one feels unheard, right? Which we've never seen in any marriages we've ever dealt with ever, so I don't even know what we're talking about, right? And the last one, resistance to antidepressant medications. Some people are resistant to the fact that they are going to need medication to do it. To which I say, you know what? I take allergy pills because I struggle with my allergies. And you know what the funny thing about allergies are? They're indicative of my whole spiritual being. You know why? Because allergies mean you're being oversensitive to pollen. You're seeing something and your body's reacting too much to it. In some ways, that's a good thing, right? I'm able to react to spiritual situations. A lot of times I can hear in the spirit what somebody's going through. The Lord will tell me what's going on in a room, and there's a way that sensitivity really helps. And then sometimes it causes my throat to overreact and shut. So, it's... and that's the thing. Oh, gosh, so how would you? I almost wish one of you guys had some chronic depression we could talk about. Don't want to give you any. I'm just saying we could. It would help. It'd be helpful, is what I'm saying.
I wish you guys had
I've
depression.
struggled with depression on and off over the years, but it's not nearly as bad as it ever used to be.
Did you go through postpartum?
No, I didn't actually.
Yeah.
No.
I've seen some people go through it, man, and it just.
I think it's easy for, like, with the postpartum thing, like, some people on the outside think you should be happy since you just brought a child into the world, all that type of stuff, and so some people don't talk about it because they feel like maybe they're going to be judged or shamed or feel guilty for not having, an overwhelming amount of joy because they just brought a child in the world. Not that it's not, but it could be overwhelming and just a lot to deal with. Yeah, and there's a huge thing there between expectation and depression, right? That when you're already struggling with like an emotional thing, adding the expectation of other people will either it'll aggravate it or it'll drive you further down, right? It'll drive that nail further into the coffin. There are times where I tell even I, the super extrovert, if I have like a couple of days where I'm around people like 12, 14 hours a day, I start to run out of that emotional energy. I'm kind of like I gotta cut, I gotta recharge. Right. I can't have anyone's expectation on me. I'll go home and Kristen will be like, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't care. I don't want to make a decision. No more decisions. I'm done making decisions. I've made all the decisions I'm going to make today, right? I am at the end of that. I don't want any more expectation on me. Yeah. I mean, if you just want to, throw a piece of bologna at my head, I'm fine. Just don't make me... If it sticks to my forehead, I'll eat dinner. Right. I had to give the visual with that, right? All right, let me see you eating bologna off your forehead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, it's exactly like me. We would have been exactly the same in trying to do that. So bottom line, this is that a lot of people struggle with it. It is really hard to talk about, and it's really hard to find people who will help you with it or can help you with it. I think when it comes to people that you can ask to help you, there has to be a trust relationship. Pastor Bashir would always say, you can't speak into someone's life over the level of relationship you built with them, right? Like if you're trying to spiritually pour into someone's life and you have zero relationship with them, they're only going to take so much of what you say because you're a stranger, right? But the deeper you've built that relationship, the deeper they'll allow you to fill them with what's going on. And sometimes there are people, sometimes I pull from Kristen's reservoir, right? Like Kristen's got a spiritual reservoir, mine's empty, and I'm like, just give me a little bit of what you got, right? Yeah. Pour that a little. It's really hard when both of you are empty because then you're just right. So one of you guys got to get filled, right? Yeah. But you have to have people that have enough of a reservoir that they can pour into you sometimes, and then you can pour back into them sometimes, right? Right. All right. With that, that's kind of the introduction. Next week we'll actually go into some of the ways to cope with it, to deal with it, to get through it. Hopefully, this will be helpful to all of you who are struggling with it or have somebody in your life who does, to help better understand them, because especially spouses, if your spouse struggles with depression, this is something you need to know about so that you'll be like a triage. You'll be that first aid. You can tie a Band-Aid on it. Maybe you can't fix the whole thing, but you can at least stop the bleeding, right? So with that, we thank you for being with us on our 55-minute, which we're a little bit over, right? Podcast today.
Join us next week, or join us Sunday, or join us tonight when we're going to have our eating disorders class, Royal Rangers class, and I think I'm in the anger management one tonight, but I might be in the other one. I don't know yet. So with that, we love you guys, so
Be real.
Be loved.
be one. Look, we did it all together. It was so nice.